I'm thinking about how, you know, Euhemeris comes along and sort of changes how these texts about these gods are done. Now all of a sudden there's this push to
Right.
make the gods literally exist, and like Zeus all of a sudden has a tomb in Crete, or um and then so the text that I was referring to in the beginning with the Sanchoniathon text that's a Phoenician text. It's not a necessarily Israelite or Canaanite, but there seems to be a influence on the Euhemerization side, whereas all of a sudden Saturn is a king on Earth, and he's circumcising himself, and um, these are stories that are happening on Earth in a time period, and people think these exist. Do you think do you think the Old Testament text, the Torah, for example? Let's stick with the Torah. Do you
Mm.
think that those texts are sort of like an example of that, of euhemerization of like I'll just throw an example out there.
Okay.
Asherah.
Hmm.
Do we have examples in the text? Because it seems that a lot of these things are after the fact, and Asherah is being banned, and all of a sudden Asherah and Baal are the gods that Jezebel worships. Therefore, they're bad. Do we see anything on the flip side of that with Asherah? Maybe some like remnants in the text that say like, "Oh, look, they were actually still worshiping Asherah," or no? Is it wait? Are we way past
You
that?
know, so I think one of my favorite texts within the Bible does reflect something like this. And I spend quite a bit of time actually in my course dealing with the fascinating text in Jeremiah chapter 44. Um, After Nebuchadnezzar's second invasion of Jerusalem, where he finally destroys the temple and burns the city and leaves it desolate and exiles all of its prominent citizens. uh, Jeremiah is given the choice to either leave with them or stay behind, and he chooses to stay behind. And chaos erupts as a result of this vacuum that's created, and he ends up basically getting kidnapped and dragged down to Egypt to live with this group of Jews in exile in this place called Taphanes in Egypt. And at one point, uh, there's this interesting account where he gets into it with, uh, in particular, the women who are living in Taphanes because of their ongoing worship of this deity identified as Malachet Hashemayim, which is translated as the queen of the heavens or the queen of heaven, which
Wow.
scholars tend to identify with Asherah. But what's really really cool about this story is a few things. In the first place, it's one of the very very few places within the entire Hebrew Bible where a group of women is actually acknowledged, right?
Right.
And this is important because what we learn from this actually aligns with what we see within the archaeological record, that when it came to the worship of Asherah, which is something that by and large took place within the household, women played a very very prominent role in the practice and performance of this religion. And this is obviously this is part of the problem, it seems, for Jeremiah, because he's constantly, one of the things that the women say to Jeremiah is that, we do all these things, we bake these cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and we basically lead and um structure this religious ceremony, and we're doing so with our husband's permission and approval. Like, they know what's going on. They see that they're right with us doing this.
Right.
And this is a real problem for Jeremiah. One of the things that they say within this text, which I think is also very telling, the people say to Jeremiah that we've been worshiping the Queen of Heaven for forever. Our forefathers were worshiping the Queen of Heaven back in Jerusalem long before Nebuchadnezzar ever came and invaded Jerusalem. And all this time, when we used to worship the Queen of Heaven, things were good. we were prosperous.
Wow.
Our nation was stable. Things it seemed to have been an efficacious religious activity. And ever since, I think at this point they're starting to reflect on the historical reality of what Josiah's reforms actually looked like. They say, ever since Josiah basically started getting after us for this, that's when things started to go to hell. So
Wow, that's
they're
incredible.
making this clear connection between, the observance of this religious practice, and in particular this deity, this Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, the participation of women within the cult. And they're saying, they're making an historical connection here, and they're saying, yeah,
Yeah.
things were good
Do you think
when this happened.
this is influences the later idea of like divine wisdom, Sophia, by the Greeks,
Mm.
the Hellenistic Jews that are one of the texts that I'm thinking of on top of my head is the Sirach, and there's also
Oh yeah.
this wisdom literature, and it's always constantly talking about wisdom as a female aspect. She is so great, wisdom, or Sophia, I guess in Hebrew it's Chachma, but like there's this like idea that wisdom is always in the feminine. Do you think this might have something to do with Asherah?
I think it's possible. And this is it's sort of a frustrating thing, because I think what you're getting at is more of a, like, it's a I think it is a late development,
Sure.
whereby this idea, and maybe this is the best way to put it, like, what we've got the traditional religions of ancient Israel, and then, you know with the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile, and then the uh, uh, the end of the Babylonian Empire and the emergence of the Persian Empire, kind of creates this black box where we have kind of an idea of what happened before, and then we have this idea and these surviving texts and traditions that came after, like
Right.
in the Hellenistic period. And very frustratingly, there's like this gap, and we can't see what happened, in between that point. But I think there's probably some currency to this idea that whatever Chokhmah was, this Sophia, this wisdom figure that Ben Sira regards, and we read about in the book of Proverbs as well. Whatever this figure came to be uh, in the Hellenistic period, yeah, I think you can make a case that um, the Asherah figure, which was heavily suppressed uh, by the people who redacted and collected the traditions which came to be the Hebrew Bible, maybe this is the best reflection of what she was like. I don't think you can make this direct connection,
It makes a lot
but
of
I
sense
think you
though, what you
can
said.
you can say, this is probably what, a similar respect to how she might have functioned
That makes a lot of sense.
in the ancient religion. Yeah.
My last question, and by the way, just want to keep reminding people, there's more on this in the course. This is how many hours is the
13
course
hours.
total?
13 hours.
That's amazing.
18
What
lectures.
what a resource that's gonna be to have at your side, to be able to look into, go back to, take some notes on it, use it as a tool, as a resource for your studies. I'm gonna be doing it. My last question, I just wanna end on this. This is kind of a fun one. There are some people who think there's evidence of King David. He's acknowledging another God's existence. Someone pointed at it and said, "Look, if he's acknowledging that God exists, then there must have been
Well,
this must
this
have been
is
a time of polytheism."
it's pretty, even like, apologists will acknowledge that there is, at minimum, an obvious awareness of other gods, and not just as like lifeless idols, but actual deities who could do stuff in the ancient world, right? In ancient Israel, and we see this replete throughout the biblical text. And one of the best places to look for this is in the writings of the prophets. When you see many of the Hebrew prophets talking about foreign gods, particularly those of the 8th century, like Hosea, Amos, First Isaiah, Micah. When they talk about other gods, it's always with this recognition that they're real and that they can do things.
Yeah.
And their promotion tends to be that Yahweh's just way better than all these other gods, right?
Yeah. He's in control. These other gods are just minor deities. Yeah, that's a fascinating thing, because in later times it becomes this, they don't even exist, they're false. I don't know if maybe Elijah, and he has this duel with the Baal priest. I don't know if that's starting to happen then, maybe, or not, but like, because it's almost like your God is not even real. Look, you can't even do anything. Look, I can call down fire from heaven. You can't do none of that stuff. But if you go back farther, like Moses, for example, in his duel, whatever you want to call it, the priest in Egypt, they're actually making stuff happen. Their magic's working. So I wonder, it's interesting, like, how does that transition? It's probably a long time. Probably takes a long time for that to ensue. It's not overnight.
No, definitely not. And I think it's something too that doesn't even happen until much later. Like you know, there's I think there's still, even among the writers in, you know, after the Babylonian exile, there's this recognition that these beings are real and they could do stuff. So yeah, it's something that takes place over a longer period of time, and it's something that, if it ever if it ever is actually completely disregarded, doesn't happen, certainly not uh, during the time period that we would want to, or I think that we would intuit it should have happened. There's something that's happening quite recently here. Within the next several months, there is actually a group of scholars getting together for a conference addressing just this question, and basically promoting this idea that even the concept of monotheism is just not something that you can ever talk about
Right.
with regards to the Bible or the biblical religions, because it's just we have such an anachronistic understanding of what that means. It just doesn't even apply.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's like, it makes you wonder, out of all the gods that came to be known as the God, somehow this Yahweh, and I'm sure I'll show it on the screen right now as I'm saying it. This is the idol of Yahweh that we have in the museum. This little dinky gold character. Now he's the one outside space and time all of a sudden. Like,
King of the universe.
he won the game of the gods.
Yeah.
But anyways, the course is in the description. Use my link, and I'm definitely going to be using. I cannot wait to have this course and use it as a resource in my personal studies. Thank you, Dr. Kipp.
Awesome. You're welcome.
You have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.